In 1344, a teenage boy stood over 4 fresh graves: his father, his mother, his brother, his sister-in-law, dead within weeks of each other. No ceremony, no coffins. The ground was too hard to dig properly. He had to beg a neighbor for scraps of cloth to wrap the bodies. He had no food, no home, no future. His name was Zhu Yuanzhang, and one day, this boy would become the most powerful man on earth. Let's start from the beginning. Rural China, a small, forgotten village in Anhui province. Zhu Yuanzhang didn't just grow up poor. He grew up at the very bottom of the world's most stratified society. His family were tenant farmers under the Yuan Dynasty, a foreign regime founded by the Mongols, descendants of Kublai Khan. To the ruling class, this was an empire of order and wealth. To Zhu's family, it was a grinding, endless fight to survive. They farmed land they didn't own. They paid taxes they could barely afford. A bad harvest didn't just mean hunger. It meant debt, eviction, ruin. And yet, for a time, they endured. The family stayed together. They worked. They prayed. Some years were harder than others, but they were alive. That was enough. Until it wasn't. In 1344, disaster arrived without warning. First, the Huai River flooded, destroying crops across entire regions. Then drought followed. Then locusts. As if nature itself had declared war on the poor, famine swept through the countryside like wildfire, and in Zhu Yuanzhang's village, the dying began. His father went first, then his oldest brother, then his mother, all within the same month. Zhu was 16 years old. He and his surviving brother couldn't even bury their parents properly. They had no land. Technically, the plot they'd farmed for years didn't belong to them. A local landlord had to grant them a small corner of earth for the graves. They wrapped the bodies in old cloth. They dug as deep as they could, and then there was nothing left to do. Think about that moment. A teenager kneeling in the dirt, burying his parents with his bare hands, not as part of some ancient ritual, but because there was simply no one else to do it. That image never left him. We know this because decades later, after he had become emperor, the most powerful man in China, Zhu Yuanzhang would still talk about those graves. He never forgot where he came from. But in 1344, all of that was impossibly far away. He had no food, no shelter, no family, no future. He was alone. With nothing left in the village, Zhu Yuanzhang did the only thing he could. He walked. For the next few years, he survived as a wandering beggar, moving from town to town, eating whatever scraps he could find. Rotting grain from the roadside, charity from strangers. Sometimes nothing at all. People slammed doors in his face. Others chased him away. A few were kind enough to offer a bowl of rice, not out of wealth, but out of the shared misery of the time. Because almost everyone was struggling, he slept under bridges, in doorways, on temple steps. Every single day was the same brutal calculation. How do I survive until tomorrow? This isn't a metaphor. This wasn't a difficult period that built character in some comfortable, distant way. This was years of real, grinding, daily desperation. But something was happening inside him. When you have nothing left to lose, when hunger has already taken everything, fear starts to loosen its grip. Zhu Yuanzhang was learning, not from books, but from the road, from rejection, from the reality of an empire that did not care if he lived or died. He was learning what real China looked like, and what it felt like to be invisible within it. Eventually, the wandering led him to a Buddhist monastery, Huangjue Temple. For a starving orphan, it was the closest thing to salvation he'd ever known. He became a novice monk. They gave him food, shelter, a place to sleep, a routine. For the first time in years, he didn't go to bed wondering if he would wake up. He shaved his head, he swept floors, he learned prayers, and for a brief moment, life was stable. But stability in 14th century China was always fragile. Because beyond the monastery walls, the empire was unraveling. The Yuan Dynasty, already weakened by decades of mismanagement and corruption, was losing control of the countryside. Tax collectors extorted the poor. Government officials stole relief supplies meant for famine victims. Bandit gangs roamed freely, and rebellion was beginning to simmer. The monastery felt it too. Donations dried up. Food supplies ran low. Within a few years of Zhu's arrival, the monks could no longer sustain themselves. The monastery shut down. And just like that, Zhu Yuanzhang was cast out again, back into the world, back into uncertainty. But this time, he was different. He was older, harder. He'd had time to think, to observe, to understand. The wandering years had taught him to read people. The monastery had given him discipline, and the suffering, years and years of it, had burned away everything weak inside him. What was left was something dangerous, a man with nothing to lose and everything to prove. By the late 1340s, rebellion wasn't just simmering anymore, it was erupting. The most powerful movement was called the Red Turban Rebellion, a loose coalition of peasants, laborers, and outlaws united by a shared belief that the Yuan Dynasty had lost the mandate of heaven. In Chinese political tradition, this wasn't just a slogan, it was a verdict. It meant the dynasty's time was up. Heaven itself had withdrawn its approval, and the floods, the famines, the suffering were the proof. Across China, people were whispering it, then saying it out loud, then fighting for it. Armies were forming, cities were falling, the old order was cracking apart. And Zhu Yuanzhang, now in his early 20s, was watching all of it. He had wandered through enough of China to understand what was actually happening on the ground. Not through official proclamations or court histories, but through his own eyes. He'd seen the dying villages, the empty granaries, the landlords growing fat while peasants starved. He knew this wasn't just a political crisis, it was a reckoning. In 1352, Zhu Yuanzhang made the most important decision of his life. He joined the Red Turbans. Now, hold on. Let's sit with that for a moment. This wasn't a young man with prospects, weighing his options. This was a beggar, an orphan, a former monk with no status, no wealth, no connections, no military training. The kind of person history never remembers. Joining a rebellion meant risking death, but staying on the sidelines meant remaining nothing. And Zhu Yuanzhang had decided, somewhere in those long years of hunger and wandering, that he was done being nothing. He walked into a rebel camp. And history changed. When he arrived, he was just another face in a crowd of desperate men. Nobody special, nobody important. But those who fought alongside him started noticing things. He didn't complain. He followed orders completely. When given a task, he executed it without hesitation. When the situation changed, he adapted faster than anyone else. He studied the men above him, their tactics, their decisions, their mistakes. And slowly, something shifted. He was given more responsibility. He gained the trust of his commanders. He started earning alliances, not through charm or birth or wealth, but through sheer demonstrated ability. His commander, Guo Zixing, noticed him enough to offer him his adopted daughter in marriage. This wasn't just a gesture of affection. In the social mechanics of a rebel army, this was recognition, status. A signal to everyone else that this man mattered. Zhu Yuanzhang had gone from nobody to somebody. It was only a beginning. But it was a beginning. Here's something worth understanding. Most of the men who joined the rebellion in those years were desperate. That was common. What was rare, genuinely rare, was what Zhu Yuanzhang had developed through his particular kind of suffering. The years of begging had taught him to read people instantly, who could be trusted, who was dangerous, who was pretending to be something they weren't. The monastery had taught him discipline and patience, the ability to endure routine without breaking. And the famine, losing his entire family at 16, had removed the thing that paralyzes most people at critical moments, the fear of losing everything, because he had already lost everything, twice. Most men fight to protect what they have. Zhu Yuanzhang fought with nothing to protect, which meant he could take risks no one else would dare to take. That asymmetry would define his entire rise. By the early 1350s, China was unrecognizable. The Yuan Dynasty, which had once seemed invincible, was fighting fires on every front. Rebel armies controlled vast territories. Entire provinces had slipped beyond imperial control. The dynasty was hemorrhaging, losing territory, losing legitimacy, losing the belief of its own people. And in the chaos, new powers were rising. Warlords, rebel generals, men who had once been farmers and monks and beggars, now commanding armies that could shake dynasties. Zhu Yuanzhang was among them, still young, still learning, still climbing, but climbing fast. It's worth pausing here, at the end of this first chapter, to remember what we're looking at. Not a hero, not yet, not a visionary or a king, just a man who had been broken by the world and somehow came back harder. Every grave he dug, every door slammed in his face, every night sleeping on cold stone, every year of invisibility. None of it destroyed him. All of it built him. And now, for the first time in his life, Zhu Yuanzhang was exactly where the world's chaos needed someone like him to be. At the center of a rebellion that was about to change everything. The orphan was gone. The rebel had arrived. In next episode, Zhu Yuanzhang stops following orders and starts giving them. He builds his own army, takes his first city, and begins the brutal climb toward becoming China's most unlikely emperor.